Ladies and gentlemen, invited and distinguished guests, and especially our future honorary doctors and award winners, members of our supervisory board, Mayor of the city of Maastricht, university staff, representatives of Luxembourg, Lithuania, Germany, El Salvador, students, and last but not least, our own alumni, amongst others from Premium. A very hard welcome here at this Dies Natalis 2014, in which we celebrate this university's 38th birthday. Science, and more broadly academic research, has had a rough time last year. I probably should add now this week. End of last year, Alexander Afonso, a lecturer at King's College London, wrote an interesting blog entitled "How Academia Resembles a Drug Gang." When I took over from Gerard Mols, I referred back to an earlier column I had written in the local newspaper, Dagblad de Limburger, in which I compared the management of a university to the management of a zoo. And I quote, "I have to be careful these days, and now in particular, and make sure to quote my own previous publications for fear of being accused of self-plagiarism. And as I do not know whether self-plagiarism applies also to translations, I prefer to quote the original text. Je hebt dus, zo schreef ik, een reeks verschillende bijzondere dieren in huis, de hoogleraren, elk met heel bijzondere kenmerken. Sommigen zijn eerder vredelievend, zelfs schattig, hebben een hoog aaibaarheidsgehalte. Anderen zijn dan weer schichtig en blijven het liefst in hun academisch hok. Het managen van een zoo is complex. Je inwoners hebben allemaal verschillende behoeftes en voorkeuren. Sommigen kun je samen laten hokken in eenzelfde tuin of gebouw, een faculteit, een departement, een instituut. Andere moet je juist apart houden." End of quote. Not having a real zoo here in Maastricht, but quite a number of drug runners, I must admit that Afonso's analogy between academia and a drugs gang appears much more interesting than my zoo analogy. Afonso was inspired by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner's Freakonomics and the chapter entitled "Why Do Drug Dealers Still Live with Their Mums?" In the case of drug gangs, the income distribution is typically extremely skewed in favor of those at the top, with rank-and-file street sellers earning below a living wage. That's why they still live with their mums. If, and again I quote now literally from Afonso, you take into account the risk of being shot by rival gangs, ending up in jail, or being beaten up by your own hierarchy, you might wonder why anybody would work for such a low wage and at such dreadful working conditions instead of seeking, for instance, employment at McDonald's. Yet gangs have no difficulty in recruiting new members. The reason for this is that the prospect of future wealth, rather than current income and working conditions, is the main driver for people to stay in the business. Low-level drug sellers forego current income for uncertain future wealth. It's of course very unlikely that they will ever make it. Their mortality rate is insanely high, but they're ready to get rich or die trying. With a constant supply of new drug sellers ready to be exploited, drug lords can become increasingly rich without needing to distribute their wealth towards the bottom. In short, a continuous expanding mass of rank-and-file outsiders ready to forgo income for future wealth, and a small core of insiders securing incomes largely at their expense. Sounds familiar, no? And as Afonso highlights, even if the probability that you might get shot in academia is relatively small, unless you mark student papers very harshly, one can observe similar dynamics. More seriously, I believe that we still haven't realized how dramatically the science and research system has changed over the last decade, how much science has been in transition for some time now. With the easiness of digital access, we have witnessed a dramatic transformation in the organization, sharing, networking, accessing, and production of knowledge. As if Isaac Newton's standing on the shoulder of giants has received a dramatic impulse. The shift from simple internet technologies to Web 2 has led to what some have called e-science or Science 2.0, with new forms of scientific output, such as nano-publications, data and code, a disintegration of the value chain, a greater role for inductive methods. Everything becomes a genome project. A global scaling up of serendipity with big linked data, collaborative annotation, social networking, and knowledge mining, detecting unexpected correlations on massive scale. Better science with reproducible and truly falsifiable research findings. An earlier uncovering of mistakes. More productive science, reusing data and products, crowdsourcing of work, and reducing time to publication. These changes have accelerated the transformation of the way research is being carried out. Two stand out, which I would like to highlight briefly here. First, the explosion of scientific institutions in new centers of the world as part of globalization of science. Overall, at the world level, there are today operational the largest amount of active scientists ever. These scientists are all confronted with the organizational Science 2.0 changes just mentioned and the huge need for more alternative platforms to publish, pushing the scientific progress to deliver faster. It is here that Afonso's analogy of the academic job market with the drug gang brings to the forefront the rapidly expanding mass of young researchers at the world level and the relatively shrinking core of insiders. Academic systems more or less everywhere in the world rely on the existence of a continuous supply of outsiders, ready to forgo wages and employment security in exchange for the prospect of an uncertain security, prestige, freedom, and reasonably high salaries that tenured positions entail. This increase of input in the global academic system looking for output and recognition is one of the main drivers why the system as we knew it is being challenged. Most insiders who control this market and also the measurement of the quality of the output, excellence, reputation, have been hired at a time when no such competition existed. Ultimately, there is no reason why, for instance, the old age of a university would remain a competitive advantage for research or for its current academic reputation. Once the outsider-insider dualization of the academic labor market is fully recognized. We might well witness in the near future much more radical processes of creative destruction with new young players challenging the protected insiders. The second radical change is the democratization and participation of knowledge, challenging us as academic community, having had for centuries privileged access to scientific facts and wisdom. Last September, the American popular science magazine, Popular Science, decided to shut off readers' comments. As the online content editor Suzanne Labarre wrote, and again I quote, "Comments can be bad for science. That's why we're shutting them off. It wasn't a decision we made lightly. As the news arm of a 141-year-old science and technology magazine, we are as committed to fostering lively intellectual debate as we are to spreading the word of science far and wide. The problem is when it appears that even a fractious minority wields enough power to skew a reader's perception of a story, as recent research suggests, we get into problems. Uncivil comments not only polarize readers, they often change a participant's interpretation of the news story itself. Simply inducing an ad hominem attack in a reader comment is enough to make study participants think the downside of the reported technology is greater than they previously thought. If you carry out those results to their logical end, and I'm still quoting here from Labarre, commenters shape public opinion shapes public policy shapes how and whether and what research gets funded, and you start to see why we feel compelled to hit the off switch. A politically motivated, decades-long war on expertise has eroded the popular consensus on a wide variety of scientifically validated topics, Everything from evolution to the origins of climate change is mistakenly up for grabs again. Scientific certainty is just another thing for two people to debate on television. And because comment sections tend to be a grotesque reflection of the media culture surrounding them, the cynical work of undermining bedrock scientific doctrine is now being done beneath our own stories with a website devoted to championing science. End of quote. Labarre's frustration finds undoubtedly a lot of sympathy with many of us. This extreme reaction highlights the problem we as academic community are and will be increasingly confronted with in the participatory knowledge society, if you would allow me to use this term. As Lex Bouter, my ex-colleague at the Vrije Universiteit, likes to emphasize, the democratization of science has meant that our authority has been waning. Wetenschap is ook maar een mening. We're also challenged here by the social media and the media tout court with their need for quick, simple, and if I may add, scoring responses. Uncertainty, complexity, a probability of a finding doesn't fit well with those needs. One is looking for 2-minute answers put in black and white terms with no room for doubt. As Anne Glover, the European Commission's Chief Scientific Officer, puts it, and again I quote, due to the complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity of contemporary knowledge construction, knowledge claims are often contested and leave ample room for different interpretations. Knowledge often increases the experience of uncertainty rather than reducing it. This has led to the problematic belief that all truth claims are more or less arbitrary and driven by personal or institutional interests rather than factual insights. End of quote. How to respond to these challenges? Retract in our elitist world, as the editor of Popular Science felt obliged to do? Or embrace the participatory knowledge society, as I'm sure Robert Dijkgraaf would suggest? We probably would all want to opt for the latter, but mathematics and physics is rather different from life sciences, climate change, or social sciences. The participatory barriers are of a very different nature. And participation remains something we should, as academic community, also cherish, try to benefit from. My economic colleague, Marcel Canoy, one of the 8 authors of an article in NRC, which has become known in the social media as the NRC 8, put forward the idea of introducing compassion, mededogen in Dutch, in communications with the media when confronted with populism. As he describes, of course, the opinion piece on which he and his colleagues, including our colleague Alt-Willem Heringa, responded. Let me quote from his recent opinion piece in Financieel Dagblad, the economic quality newspaper of the Netherlands. Populisme trekt zaken, and again I quote, and I follow the lines of self-plagiarism, or in this case citations, I will limit myself to the original. Populisme trekt zaken bewust uit hun verband. Het leidt ogenschijnlijk tot verwoede debatten, maar het wellens-niets karakter staat werkbare oplossingen in de weg. Boerroepers hebben een uitlaatklep, maar omdat populisme niet oplossingsgericht is, werkt het zelfversterkend. De combinatie van sociale media en de dunne marges waaronder de geschreven pers moet opereren, maakt het mogelijk voor populisten om media effectief in te zetten. Steeds vaker zien we het volgende patroon. Eerst verschijnt een ronkend artikel in een om lezersaantallen smachtende krant. Vervolgens fungeren sociale media als geoliede ophitsmachines en tenslotte gaan de praatprogramma's eroverheen. Het blijkt verleidelijk ook voor mij om populisten met gelijke munt te betalen en hun geschriften weg te zetten als feitenvrije ondergravingen van ordentelijk bestuur. Maar dat zou het gevoel van een samenzwering van de elite tegen het volk juist kunnen versterken. De strijd kan beter gevoerd worden door de onderliggende onvrede te adresseren en door met mededogen te reageren. Mededogen duidt op het empathische vermogen je te verplaatsen in een ander en daarbij mildheid te betrachten. Een zekere afstand kunnen nemen van jezelf, je eigen interpretaties van waarnemingen, je oordeel, mening of eigen belang. Omgekeerd, hoe minder je daarin slaagt, des te gekleurder, want zelfgerichter je beeld van de wereld wordt. End of quote. Compassion. An interesting concept to reflect upon in the way we, as academic community, participate ourselves in the participatory knowledge society. While compassion might seem at first sight very much at odds with the typical scientist's search for the truth, it might well hold interesting features in re-establishing trust between science, the media, and the public at large. In my first talk to the largest research community at our university, the PhD fellows, back in October 2012, I made a strong plea for less exaggeration in research writing. We are a scientific community. We do ultimately not need marketing jargon to present our results or to highlight the importance of our findings or trying to convince with superfluous words or boasting oneself. You'll undoubtedly all recognize the examples of spin and boasting as quoted in Cummings and Rivera. And I give you a couple of quotes from them. These findings, as you find them in most of the research papers, these findings open up a new frontier. This study represents the first unequivocal demonstration. This study uses the largest sample size. This provides strong new evidence. It's one of the most detailed studies. Researchers should present evidence so others may understand and judge it. If findings are lucid and powerful, words to persuade are superfluous. In short, a call to resist immodest chest thumping. Very similar to Canoe's notion of compassion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope from this perspective that you will also have some compassion here and now with me trying to bring this academic celebration to a good end, and also time-wise to a good end. Indeed, we do have a long session, and in this long session, we first and foremost are pleased and honored to confer 5 honorary doctorates, after which we will give the 2013 Win and Twijnen Education Prize, and then we will award the dissertation prize for the first time this year, or for this university, for the best dissertation in 2013. In keeping with tradition, 7 student prizes will be granted for the best thesis of 2013. And of course, this year, the Dies celebration is marked by André Postma's farewell. After 2 terms of vice president of Maastricht University, he will be stepping down, or he has stepped down already, from the executive board. And this afternoon, as the cerise sur le gâteau, André will deliver his farewell speech entitled Maastricht University, A Love Story.